Welcome back to one more webinar. On the specific one, we will cover the rules around the transition area. So, Steph, what you can share with us and our participants on this subject?
Yeah, basically, I mean, this is probably something that you've all experienced. One of the most common mistakes that we find in transition is the behavior of the athletes with the helmet. So basically, we must ensure that the helmet is always fastened on the athletes whenever they have the bikes in their hands. Okay, so they can only take the bikes once the helmet is closed, and they can only open the helmet once they have put the bikes back on the rack. The other thing that we need to monitor, of course, is that the athletes use their own designated bike area and bike racks.
Leslie, are there specific regulations on how the athletes they can mount the bike at the bike rack?
Yeah, so there are two different types of bike racks that we use, and this slide deals with both of them. We talk about the traditional bike rack and then the individual bike rack. So normally age group athletes use the traditional bike rack, and this slide talks about how in first transition they're going to rack the bike from the saddle, so it's going into transition ready to take off and go, and then when they come back they're going to have both of their handlebars or both brake levers or the seat post, but it'll be facing the opposite direction as it was. And then the individual bike racks we see more used in an elite race, and the athletes have to rack it with the rear wheel for the first one, and the second transition they can have the choice of doing it by either.
Okay. Steph, are there any regulations on how far from your spot you can place your equipment?
Yes, we do have some regulations because we want to avoid the people to spread over, and we want the transition to look clean. So basically, the equipment must stay within 0.5 meters of the bike rack, and if we have a bin, it must stay within 0.5 meters of the bin, which itself stays 0.5 meters from the bike rack. I don't know if you follow me.
I do.
But what is important to say is that any used equipment must be placed in the bin if we have a bin provided, okay? And that the athlete is only allowed to place the equipment that they're going to be used for the competition on their designated spots, nothing else. If there are like dry clothes for after or before the race, it needs to be moved out of the transition.
One question that I get a lot at races is if they do have a basket or a bin, does it have to be placed on the right or the left-hand side? Mm-hmm. And it can go on either side as long as each athlete has the appropriate space. We usually tend to place them all in the same direction because, as Stefan said, it looks nicer, but if an athlete is left-handed, they could go to the other side as long as it doesn't infringe.
Yeah. The magic word is as long as there is enough space for the athletes. If not, then the officials they have to advise the athletes to leave the basket where they found it. Leslie, can the athletes leave any equipment on the bicycle?
Okay, so we do have specific rules around this, and so Stefan mentioned used equipment versus equipment that's still going to be used. So they can place equipment on the bike that they're going to be using in the future. Nothing that's not going to be used in the race should be left in transition at all. And so we really want to make sure that the transition is as clean as we can get it.
Okay. Are there any additional rules that we can share with our athletes, with our participants regarding transition area?
Well, with regards to just making sure that when you're setting up your transition that it doesn't interfere with anybody else.
Okay. Steph, as far as concerned the mount and dismount line, are there any specific regulations around this?
Yes, of course. The athletes basically need to respect the transition where there is no riding of a bike within the transition. So they are allowed to mount on their bike only after having a complete foot in contact with the ground after the mount line. And when they dismount their bike, they must have one foot, complete foot, in contact with the ground before the red light that is marking the dismount line.
Leslie, what about nudity?
The good old days when we allowed nudity. We don't allow it anymore. Our sport is now worldwide, and some conventions are not as free with their bodies as others. So we can't have people changing in the transition area as we used to do. Athletes cannot stop in the flow of the transition area. They must keep moving in one direction as dictated by the race. They can't mark their transition area in any way. We see people taking chalk or putting balloons on the bike rack. They can't, towels. They can't do any of that. And one thing that as officials that we do is we walk through transition and make sure that athletes don't have their helmet fastened when they're doing the swim, that it's unfastened, so that they're truly going to have to put on their helmet and fasten it up.
So the helmet at the end will fit properly.
Yeah.
On the head. Okay, so let's go through a number of questions which will hopefully will help our audience understand more the rules. So Steph, what is the penalty if an athlete loses his or her bike shoe at this moment?
Actually, there is no penalty. I mean, it changed like a couple of years ago, I think. But basically now it's completely involuntarily. So we do not penalize the athletes for that. We just make sure that we get the shoes out of the athletes coming behind, but that's it, basically.
Okay. But the athlete might not get their bike shoe back at the end if we can't figure out whose bike shoe it is to begin with. So.
Yeah. Leslie, are there something that doesn't seem right on this photo?
Yeah, there's a few things wrong with these photos. So you'll see that the individual who's looking at his watch obviously doesn't feel confident in the timers, but his helmet isn't done up and he is in possession of his bike. So he would have to do his helmet up before he touched his bike. In the middle photo, it looks like the individual has a visor on as well as the helmet, and that's not the way that the manufacturer meant for the helmet to be worn, so that's not the way that it should be worn. Yeah, not as secure as it should be. And then this young man doesn't have his helmet on properly either. So we need to educate people during the bike check-in that these things are unacceptable.
Okay. Steph, any issue with the specific photo?
Yeah, there's a couple of issues here. You probably all see the one with the handlebar. So basically when the athletes come back in transition 42, he must rack, if he decides to rack the bike with the handlebar, both sides of the handlebar must be on the bike rack, on the support. It's to prevent that basically the bike tilts and takes the space of another athlete's. And there's also another point here to note on that particular case is that you notice that the bike number 4 is in the position of number 3 and number 3 in position of number 4. So that's also something that we try to prevent. Basically, we try to amend, or if we are near to the athlete, we ask him to amend in an age group event. Otherwise, we do it ourselves so that the next person comes and found his spot clean, basically, and usable.
Leslie?
Okay, well, always you. I always get the nudity ones. I made light of the no nudity in transition area a few slides back, but we do have a number of different cultures competing in our races, and we have to make allowances for certain religions and certain cultures who want to have a changing area next to transition area. This is going to be communicated to the technical delegate long before the transition ever gets set up. But there might be an enclosure or a tent that these individuals could go to and change in privacy before they put on whatever they need to get onto the bike. So I didn't make light of it, but it is a welcome addition that we have to look after this because we are expanding into other areas.
Okay. And Steph?
Yeah, this of course, as it was mentioned by Leslie, this is considered as marking, so there is no towel, there is no whatever plastic bag. There is no chalk. You say that's what you say, chalk on the ground. So no markings of the position, because that's not fair compared to the other who do not do it, because it makes it easier to spot the position in the transition.
Would this be okay if it was a reusable bag as opposed to a plastic bag? More environmentally friendly? Would that make any difference?
When do you think it would be better for me? But no. No. Basically, that's one of the jobs of the TOs. If we see that, we just remove these markings. If we don't see the athletes, and if for example it's too late and the athlete has gone out of transition already, we just go there and we just clean it up ourselves. Towel here, in that case we do the towel as well on the back side of the image.
Leslie, are there any different rules for the long distance events?
Thanks for asking the question, Thanos. There are a few different rules in long distance. The athletes obviously need more equipment. And so instead of having everything at transition, they actually have to put everything into a bag that's probably provided for them by the LOC into a special transition area bag drop off. They are allowed to leave their bike shoes on the bike before and after the event, correct? And so everything else should be clean. And so that's the major difference between long distance events and other events that we host.
Exactly. So as a summary on the rules, there are specific regulations around how the athletes should mount the bikes in case of individual bike racks or in case of traditional bike racks. There are specific rules on mount and dismount the bike when you come in the transition. The athletes, they have to make sure that they don't interfere with the other athletes' flow or the other athletes' equipments. Where they will place the equipments, again, it's explained in our rule book quite detailed. And the last part that was added this year is the provision for the long distance events where a changing tent and the bag system is existing and how we need to manage this. So transition zone, it's a big area, and definitely there are a lot of things that we have to check at the same time. But by having the right education and the right guidance, this can always happen. So thank you very much for watching.